Welcome to I Do This for a Living, a show that asks how we can spend as much time and energy on the things that matter as we do on the things that pay. I'm Serenity, your host, and I am beside myself because today's guest pretty much wrote the thesis for this show. I'm going to quote the quote. He says, when we actively invest in our non-work selves, we create an identity no boss, company, or labor market has the power to affect. And I know I talk about work on this show all the time. I love talking about work because I love figuring out how to find the right work and other people's relationships to work, since mine is its own thing. I love to talk to other people about that. But the I Do This for a Living title, as you know, is largely based on making important the other things we care about in life and making them as important as we make work. We show up to work sick. We show up to work on Monday when we super don't want to. My answer to how was your weekend could generally be, well, I wish I was still in it. So, I Do This for a Living is about, can I do that same thing with wanting to not worry as much? Can I do that like it's my job? Wanting to read more instead of scrolling, writing a book. Can I do that as diligently as I show up to work on Monday to mess with spreadsheets and stuff? And so I love the person who's on the episode today, which I can't believe I haven't said yet. His name is Simone Stolzoff. He wrote these books. I've read this one 3 times. The Good Enough Job. I've read this one twice. How to Not Know. This one just came out this year, and he does kind of dig me a little bit in the conversation that I've read it twice when it came out so recently. But dudes, I was going to have him on my show, so I definitely wanted to know his work really well. So I've read them a lot. The Good Enough Job is up there with Elizabeth Gilbert's big magic for me in solving some of my work artist angst. So I can't believe he's on the show. And I don't want to waste your time just talking about him when you can get to know him and hear what he has to say and answer some of my burning questions about work and jobs and artist angst and all that tension. Let's get to it. Simone Stolzoff, thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
I invited you here today because you are a writer and speaker whose concepts are basically the thesis for this podcast. Yeah. I've read your book, the first book, the yellow one, 3 times.
Wow.
And the second one, How to Not Know, the orange one, I have read twice. So you have agreed to be on the podcast of a super fan. How do you feel about that?
Appreciate you. Good, as long as I don't tell you my address and I look over my shoulder when I'm in public. I think I'll be all right.
Okay, I think my family can vouch for me. I'm not a crazy person. Just easily starstruck. Wait, easily starstruck does not sound good. I just get starstruck by awesome people, and you have done that for me. I really love your message and the stuff you're saying in the world.
I appreciate you. Yeah, no, I mean, I think writing is such a solitary act. And, before you publish a book, it's normally years just in front of the glowing screen. And so once a book finally comes out and you can connect with people and talk about the ideas, that's sort of the whole point. And I'm an extrovert. And so I particularly like these moments where, I've been in my cave for the last few months and I get to emerge into the sunlight and actually connect with people. So it's a pleasure for me as well.
You're a writer, but an extrovert?
I am, yeah, for better or for worse.
I always think I should test introvert because I do love that quiet, solitary time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally test extrovert. So actually the thesis for this podcast, I should warn you, is that I've never figured out this work thing, and I book guests and then use them as therapists. So
wonderful. Well, I'm the son of 2 therapists, so at least I've gotten some skills through osmosis.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Okay, now it's actually very important to me that I start with a really specific question. Simone Stolzoff, what do you like to do?
Yeah, it's kind of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink kind of question because I give a TED talk, and this is sort of like the piece of advice that I ended on, which is also in my first book, The Good Enough Job. Lots of things. I think the most pressing right now is that my wife and I are both learning how to salsa dance, which is very fun because she is a dancer and I have two left feet, and so I'm learning to get out of my natural state, which is that of a indifferent spatula, and become a little bit more mobile in my body. I play ultimate frisbee, which is not doing much to dispel the California stereotype, but those are two of my main sort of hobbies. And then I love to read. And, I think in many ways, reading feels like the inhale and writing is the exhale. And so though
Mm.
I write professionally for work, reading is really sort of what gets me inspired to write.
Oh, that's good. That's good. The salsa thing, I have to know. I had a guest on who said something that she recommends for everyone is that you um, try to find places where you can fail. It's like
Mm.
when you started salsa, was it truly like, I don't know how to do this and if I will ever learn?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I like about it. I have three things. One is that no one at the salsa class knows anything about what I do for work. They don't care how many words I've written or books I've sold. It's a great community that holds a different identity. Two is, yeah, is exactly like it's really fun to have a space that you can fail, but also just to be on the steep part of the learning curve again.
Mm-hmm.
As you get more calcified in your career and your ways of doing things, it's harder to find things that you're bad at or things that feel like you're really excited and are learning. And three, I just love the music, and so regardless of any of the dancing, it's nice to just be in a space where there's music, and particularly with salsa, there's a lot of live music ways to dance. And so it's a really nice sort of third space for me to inhabit that's beyond just my home life. And I'm a new parent as well. And so much of my identity and my relationship with my wife as of late have been in relation to our kid. And so this is a nice space for us to be adults
Oh,
and just relate
yeah.
to each other as partners.
So good. That's so true. So to expound a little for my listeners on why I asked you that question first,
Mm.
as you say in your TED Talk and in your first book, you were talking to a Chilean gentleman,
Mm.
yes? And you said the typical question, what do you do? And
Mm.
he said, you
Yeah, he
mean for
said,
work?
you mean for work? Yeah, I remember this very distinctly. So for a while, I was an international correspondent. So I traveled and wrote stories overseas. And I was in Nepal. I was covering the 2015 earthquake in Nepal, and I was staying at a hostel. And it's sort of after a long day, I go upstairs to sort of the common room of the hostel, and I meet this guy. So what do you do? As easily as that rolls off the tongue for any of us work-centric Americans. And he just looked at me and he was like, what do I do? Like, you mean for work? And there was this like aha realization moment of, oh, so much of our culture that centers around work and where our job titles are synonymous with our identities is not shared by the
Mm.
entirety of the globe. And though American work standards are a cultural export, and in a more globalized world, more and more countries have the same work centricity, it's not true for everyone. And so it was a good wake up moment. And I think some of the things that informed that book, The Good Enough Job, was me being Italian myself, and then seeing my cousins, my aunts, and my uncles in Italy, where they have a very different prioritization system. So maybe faith is the most important for them, and then family and work matters, but it's not the central defining characteristic of who they are.
Yeah, I really love that story. And I really love that question. I I definitely want to integrate it into my show when I talk to people. What Here's a question for you. Do you find people are good at answering that question? What do you like
Mm.
to do?
No, in general, no. But I think
Yeah.
there is like, you have to sort of clear your throat first. At first people are like, what do I like to, like, what's a hobby? Never heard of her. Um, And then over time, people really settle in and, oh, what do I like to do? And maybe if you can't answer that question, it's more informative than if you have an easy answer off the top of your head. And, I think what I like about it is that you take the question, what do you do? And you just add two small words, then you get, what do you like to do? It's not necessarily the only question that you should ask people when you meet. I think there's lots of other ways to connect or relate to people that doesn't center what they do for work. But it's just an example of ways in which the culture around work is relational. It is reinforced by the communities, the questions, the conversations that we have. And so if we want to shift towards work not being the defining characteristic of who someone is, then it's incumbent on all of us to try and shift that culture in small ways.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. What I find when I ask people that question, and usually I've already talked to them a bit about work, and they come into my show thinking I'm mostly talking about work. Mm-hmm. I feel that they feel they're boring me. Mm-hmm. Because they'll say, oh, what do I like? I mean, I live a pretty quiet life. I like hang out with my family and read. Mm-hmm. And they think it's boring. And I don't know if perhaps that's tied to the fact that we think what we do should be productive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the ways in which work becomes like an existential balm. It's something that tells you what to care about, and whether that is the marching orders from your manager or the priorities of your company or what the CEO says in the annual meeting. It's easy to just outsource your own value system to that of your employer. And in some ways, that's nice. It's nice to be part of something that's larger than yourself. It's nice to have a built-in community. But as I argue in the book, there are risks with treating your work as your sole source of identity and meaning and community. For one, that your job might not always be there. And so I think this is a lesson that so many people learned during the pandemic when they got laid off or furloughed, or even just the nature of their job changed. If their maybe primary social community was the water cooler at the office and there was no longer an office to go to, they were forced to look in the mirror and say, wait a second, I don't have as many friends as I want in my life. I don't have a way to scratch some of those social itches. And so, you look at the title of the book, The Good Enough Job, and you may think that it's this really extreme argument of anti-work, work sucks, work is a necessary evil. And really, that's not it at all. I think it is a pretty nuanced argument that work can be a source of meaning. It can be a source of identity. It can be a source of community, so long as it's not the sole source of identity, meaning, and community in your life.
Exactly. You talk about diversifying. So here's where I'll throw in one of my just favorite quotes. I carry it through with me all the time. When we actively invest in our non-work selves, we create an identity no boss, company, or labor market has the power to affect. Mm-hmm. I just love that. It's those, like Simone said, if you can't answer that question, what do I like to do? Try to be able to answer it, because you need those other parts of your identity. Yeah, invest in those. So I love the question as well to replace, what do you want to be when you grow up, for kids? I think, what do you like to do would be such a great question for kids.
Yeah. And even, I think one thing I found from talking to lots of adults about this is sometimes you need to tap back into that more younger version, childlike self, to understand what it is that you like to do. And a lot of times there's a lot of answers in that. As a kid, maybe I love to draw, or I love to write, or I love to play basketball. And we sort of crowd that out of our personalities or our schedules as we get older and older. And so, I had this interesting conversation with a psychologist when I was reporting that book, and she works with a lot of type A, very ambitious, driven people. And she'd say, okay, you have to diversify your identity. You have to invest in other parts of yourself. And people will say, okay, I got it. I'm going to run a marathon, or I'm going to read 52 books this year. And they try and find other forms of leisure that they can quantify or turn into labor. And when you want to try and find those things that really round out your personality, that help you get in touch with those things that you intrinsically love to do, as opposed to treat as a means to some other end, it can be helpful to think about what did I like to do when I was 12? What did I like to do before I thought that time is money and I had to maximize and squeeze every dollar out of the day?
That's so good. I've heard that question. What did you like to do when you were 10 in relation to finding your purpose?
Mm,
But that's why people should ask it, is to find these just joy spots,
mhm.
the things that bring you joy. Um, let's, can I go a little early with you like that
Yeah.
then? And what was your early understanding of work? I'm interested
Mm.
to know what you saw, if you had to if people talked to you about work, or if you pretty much had to infer
Yeah.
what work
So
was.
I have an interesting family dynamic because my parents got divorced when I was really young and they both remarried. And so I have four parents, and my mom, my dad are both psychologists. My stepmom is a lawyer and my stepdad is a music presenter. So those were sort of the influences that informed my young childhood. I saw, two psychologists that taught me a lot about asking questions and the sense of service and helping people. I had this stepmom who was this, corporate lawyer who had a really strong sense of logic. A
Hmm.
lot of my desire to become a writer stemmed from her love of writing and the written word. And then I had a stepdad who was a musician, and then he started producing jazz concerts. And so I
Amazing.
learned an appreciation for the arts. I also grew up with a substantial amount of privilege in where I was always told I can basically be whatever I wanted to be or do whatever I wanted to do. And that felt both like a call to arms and like a responsibility. It's like,
Oh my
okay, I
gosh.
could be whatever I want to be. I could do whatever I wanted to do. How do you make a choice with so many potential options? And
Yeah.
so, especially in my young life, I really optimized for optionality. In college, I studied poetry and economics. And you can already see maybe an existential crisis looming on the horizon. And then I graduated, and in my early 20s, I worked in a lot of different fields. I worked in advertising, I worked in tech, I worked in journalism, I worked in design, all the while trying to find that perfect fit. And, it was sort of like I wanted to try every ice cream flavor before I committed because the opportunity cost of choosing the wrong path seemed so high. And I think there's an interesting parallel to today's day and age where a lot of young people receive similar messages of, you can do whatever you want, especially with AI. You can, learn any skill. You can try and retrain, reinvent yourself, which
Yeah.
on one hand is freeing, but on the other hand is quite a burden. And it's paired with a labor market that's shrinking where it feels like there's a scarcity of jobs. And so part of the problem in a culture of abundance is being able to make choices when there are so many options available to you. And so it wasn't until my early 30s that I decided that, okay, I want to write long form. I want to become an author. And even though I've been a full-time author for coming on 6 years now, I still sometimes feel like that 22-year-old who's like, what do I want to be when I grow up?
Ah, I can relate. My sister and I have talked about how we know we're still in that. What do you want to be when you grow up? Like we can't let go of that because we'll see a need.
Mm-hmm.
We'll identify a need in the community or something. It's like, oh, I could do that. I could do that for a living. I could fix that
Mm-hmm.
thing. It's like you never kind of let it go. So you talked about how you're a new dad. Congratulations. I mean, about a year,
Thank you. Yeah, he's a year and a half, Luca.
year and a half, Luca. Have you thought about how you will talk to Luca about work?
Yeah, I mean, I think work is going to change a lot over the course of his lifetime. He was born in 2025. He's the first year of Gen Beta, which is, the next generation
I
after
didn't
Gen Alpha.
realize.
Yeah. And, who knows what college will look like for him? Who knows what the workforce will look like for him? I think I I'm inspired by this idea of a friend of mine's older brother. And he was a really sort of unique, eccentric kid and would develop these really deep curiosities in esoteric things like mushrooms or fungi. And his dad wasn't necessarily interested in mushrooms, but because his son had this innate passion or interest, the dad got really curious and tried to foster a sense of passion and meet his son where he's at. And that's the kind of dad that I want to be. I want to really let my son lead. I don't want to superimpose my own expectations about what I think a lucrative or fulfilling career might be. I want to try and fan the flame of his curiosity and learn alongside him, just sort of give him the runway to explore as long and as far as he can.
Beautiful. That's a great answer.
Mm.
Okay. Are you ready for this?
I hope so.
You say we work more than we do just about anything else. Eat, sleep, or see our families, and how we spend those hours matters. Have you heard of Laura Vanderkam?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
yeah,
I
was on her podcast recently. She's great.
I should have listened to that one first. So she says, with a standard 40-hour work week, we sleep 8 hours a night in a dream world, and then we have 72 hours remaining that are not sleeping or work. Okay, would you argue with her with your point that we work more than we do about anything else? And if not technically, why does it feel like we work more than we do anything else? Because it sure does.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few reasons. One, today's work is extremely leaky. And so even if you have a 9-to-5 job, likely you have your email or your Slack on your phone, you're checking messages before and after the workday. There's sort of a residue to the work that bleeds outside of the lines. Second, a lot of the time that we spend outside of that confined workday is preparing or recovering from that workday.
Yes.
So whether it's like mentally trying to downshift after a busy day so you can be present at home, or preparing for the day to begin more on a commute, there's a lot more brain space that's occupied by work than just the hours that you're at the office. And then there's work that takes other forms as well. I'd argue that parenting is a form of labor. There's lots of other things that you do that is sort of the work about the work, like taxes or making sure that your home office setup is in place. And so thinking about like an average weekday, sure, maybe if you wake up at 7:00, there's 2 hours before. And then if you go to bed at 10, there's 5 hours after, which is roughly equivalent to an 8-hour workday. It's not like those 7 hours that you're off the clock are the same. One thing that I often argue is that work doesn't just take our best energy. It often takes doesn't just take our best hours. It often takes our best energy as well. And so, if you're mentally firing on all cylinders between the hours of like 9 and 11 a.m. and 5 out of 7, 9 to 11 a.m.s a week, you are chained to a desk. It has an outsized influence on your life.
Okay. Thank you for solving that. When I heard her say that, I literally had to calculate because I didn't believe her, because I just knew how it felt. And it felt like work was pretty much everything. I definitely think about it like it's everything. I definitely outsize my energy to work, I believe. You also say, this is something I want to talk about, individual responsibility versus systemic issues. You say how we work is not working. You said that in your TED Talk, and you're kind of talking about the mass disengagement. I think you named the percentage of people disengaged at work. So do you kind of put most of that on the individual, that we are not decentering work as we should, et cetera? Or do you see system flaws?
Yeah. I think it's both. And
Okay.
I think just saying it's one or the other is limiting because, for example, one example I give in the book is the country of Japan has one of the best paternity leave policies out of any developed nation. I think new fathers are entitled to 6 months of paid leave or something to that nature. And yet, from the data that I looked at most recently, less than 5% of fathers took the leave that they were entitled to. And so that sort of shows, like, even if some of the systemic
Yeah.
factors are in place, you need the individual will in order to take advantage. But the flip side is true too. You know, if you have an aspiration to have more balance in your life and it's the end of a quarter and you work in sales and you're paid on commission, you can't just say, oh, I'm just going to, take the last few weeks of the quarter off because I want more work-life balance. Or if you work an hourly job and your paycheck is contingent on how many hours you work, there's a cost to trying to find fewer hours in the week or more opportunities to do things other than work in your life. And so I do think that both need to be true. We need both systemic and high level protections in order to make the consequences of decentering work less dire. And we as individuals need to cultivate other sides of ourselves beyond just our professional sides so that, one, we can fill those spaces that we create with activities that bring us meaning and joy, and two, we can have the drive to want to find those spaces in the first place.
Yeah, that's good. I will, that reminds me that I will say of, like, Laura Vanderkam's teaching is one reason we miss those 72 hours and they fly by and we don't notice them, and is because we don't put enough intentional, interesting things. We tend to, we're tired and we scroll and do those things. So that's good. That really answered that question. So your first book was where I really hope to be able to at least briefly chat about both books because they're both so good. The Good Enough Job. When you started writing that book, and I think this answer you'll be able to define what you mean by the good enough job. When you started writing it, were you in the good enough job for you?
Yeah, in many ways, yes. So I define a good enough job in the book as a job that lets you be the person that you want to be. And what I like about the definition is it's subjective and vague, which is to say that
it sure is.
it gives each of us the opportunity to define what good enough means for ourselves. Yeah. So maybe for one person, good enough is a job that gets off at a certain hour. For someone else, maybe it's a job that pays them a certain wage or has a certain type of impact or gives them a certain job title. But the point is that once you define what enough means for you, then you could recognize when you have it and convert some of that angst maybe into gratitude for the life that you live, a gratitude for what the job you have affords outside of that. So just a brief bio, I was working as a magazine reporter, and I left journalism to go work for this design agency called IDEO. And for the first few months as I took this new job outside of journalism, I was convinced that I had made the wrong choice. I thought that I would be blacklisted from any sort of writing opportunities ever, that my old coworkers all thought that I sold out, that I had short-circuited my own drive and dreams and passion to become a great journalist. And what I learned slowly, but over time, was that this IDEO job, this job at this design firm, was actually the best thing that ever happened to my writing career, because I had this great job as a researcher where I was working with really interesting people, multidisciplinary creatives and designers, and I wasn't using the same muscles that I would use to write magazine pieces or write a book. And I started being able to write out of passion, out of desire, on nights and weekends initially. And then eventually I quit the design job and became a full-time author. And so the job allowed me to be the type of person that I wanted to be, which is someone who had enough money to pay for my material existence, someone who was engaged in the work that I was doing, but did not conflate who I was with the job. seeing the job as more of a means to another end, as opposed to just being an end in and of itself.
I'm so glad I asked that question. You didn't say when you took the job at IDEO, you had another job opportunity that was in your field, right? In the journalism
Mm-hmm.
field.
Yeah.
And deciding between those is when you kind of realized maybe you were because you felt like you were deciding between two identities.
Yeah, so I'll take you back there. I was maybe 28 or 29. I had these two job offers. One was to be a magazine reporter. One was to be a designer. And Serenity, I was insufferable. I could not make up my mind for the life of me.
I'm
I talked
insufferable
about
a
it
lot.
with everyone I knew, and my Uber driver and my yoga teacher. And I would ask anyone, like, what job do you think I should take? And
I
I think
know
there's
that
two
so well.
realizations that came out of that moment of tumult. The first was, as you mentioned, that my job and my identity had become so entwined that it didn't
Yeah.
feel like I was choosing between two jobs as much as it felt like I was choosing between two versions of me. And then the
Yeah.
second was that I was looking for certainty where there was no certainty to be found. I thought that if I just banged my head against the wall at the right angle, I'd know which of these two jobs that I should take, or which job
Yeah.
would lead me to eternal damnation and which job would lead me to heaven. And the reality is that in these moments of indecision and these career crossroads, we have to be able to make choices in spite of our doubt, in spite of our uncertainty. And I thought that if I just, waited around long enough or pulled enough third-party perspectives, then the one right job would emerge without giving myself credit and my own ability to make the job right.
Yeah. That identity thing. So when you did choose, were you choosing? Did you feel like you were choosing the job that was less meaningful?
Hmm. In some ways, yeah.
Yeah.
The design job was higher paid. I thought maybe it would be easier and less
Mm,
meaningful, less hard,
easier.
but less sort of aligned with my passion. And in many ways, I was right. It was a job that I felt okay leaving at work. I would not bring my laptop home with me at the end of the day. And that felt great after working for many years in a career where my name was on every single thing that I produced. And I would obsessively check the stats to see how many people read articles, etc. It felt really nice to have a job that was good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually learned about you because of another former IDEO employee, I think,
Mm.
Molly
Mm.
Mueller. Is
Yeah,
that
Molly's great.
right? Okay.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
would you just really briefly, will you tell my listeners what is IDEO? Because it's kind of a
Yeah.
big deal.
It's a fun place to work. It's a design firm. It's got its start as a product design company. So it was
Okay.
instrumental in building the first mouse for an Apple computer and
Ah,
lots of things that were in the physical world. And over time, it evolved to do more
yeah.
different kinds of design. And so it really made its mark by coining and popularizing this process called human-centered design, or design thinking, it's often
Yeah.
called. And the idea is they take people from different industries. So a journalist, an architect, a graphic designer, someone from the business world, and put them on these multidisciplinary teams. And then they approach problems like, what is the future of X? What is the future of the office chair? What is the future of new student orientation at this college? What is the future of workforce development in this rural town in Ohio? What does a school system look like in Peru, etc.? And they take this approach that really leads with empathizing with who you're trying to serve and really understanding their problems. And then this rapid prototyping
Yeah.
process where you build things and then you test them in the market, and then that informs what you build next. And so it's a really fun place to work. It's a job that I used a computer the least out of any job that I've had. Really interesting people, really interesting problems. And yet I knew that at the end of the day, for me, it was a job. It was not my calling. It was not my entire identity. It was the thing that I did to pay the bills. And I was grateful that I liked it and I made lifelong friends, but it was not the sole defining characteristic of my life.
Yeah, that's a great story. So I read The Good Enough Job the first time. I read it 3 times with 3 different questions going in.
Mm.
The first time it was, what is the good enough job? What does he mean? The second time was, oh man, am I in the good enough job?
Mm.
It was like, because I'd been not thinking so, but then I was really examining, I think I might be. And then the third time I was in the same job. And I was like, okay, how would I define the good enough job for myself? And then that's when I said, and it took that third time to pick up on that. Is it making you the person you want to be? And
I like that.
Jury's still out, but
yeah. I teach a course called Designing Your Next Career Step, which is about helping people get more clarity about what they want from their careers. And there are 3 common outcomes. The first is people take the course and they think that they need to make this big change and realize actually the job that I have is pretty good and just stay in the same role with a different perspective. The second is people get permission to make that big pivot or that big change that they've always wanted to make, but have never had the confidence to do. And the system of accountability and having others that are also in that sort of state of wandering through the wilderness alongside them helps give them the conviction to do so. And the third is people just start working for themselves and transition from a more maybe traditional W-2 job into something that looks more like solopreneurship or freelance outcomes. But the first outcome is actually the most common, which may be similar to you the second time you read the book. You read the book thinking, okay, is this what I want? Is there something better out there? And you realized actually, maybe if I lower the stakes a little bit, take some of the pressure off of this one job to fulfill me in all these different ways, invest in other parts of who I am beyond just work, I actually do have a good enough job that allows me to be the person that I want to be. So your experience is not unique.
that's wild. That's the majority, you would say, is where people land. Also, that course, can we get to it from your website?
Yeah, you can find it there.
Definitely want to look into that. So let me tell. I love that your book, The Good Enough Job, tells the different stories of people and how their relationship to work evolved. So I want to tell you mine a little bit because a lot of people start from a place of this is my dream job, and then I get it, and then they're a little disillusioned, and that's when they start to realize I need to find meaning elsewhere. Here's what happened to me. I entered the workforce knowing the real me is a writer, artist, creator, and a mom. Just like those are the things I wanted to be. Wife, a mom, a writer, a creator. And so I was always thinking, I'm going to do this work thing to pay the bills until the creative stuff can make me money. And the longer it took for that to happen and it not happening, that's when I realized, holy crap, this day job thing actually is my whole life. It's a lot of my life. And so then from then on, I would say, is this war inside of me of whether to, since it was so much of my life, the work thing, I started thinking, I probably should think about it more. Couldn't I get into something I like a little more that does feel more aligned? So then I'm torn because job hunting, as you know, is quite a chore, takes tons of energy and effort. And so then it was always this thing in the evening. Do I write because I know I love it? Do I do this stuff that I know I like in it? Or do I look for a thing that's going to make my days more fun to wake up to? I've never really solved the war. It's constant.
Yeah. Well, I'd argue that it's not a war that needs to be solved. I think there is some healthy tension in asking yourself those 2 questions. And one thing I really believe is that there's a seasonality to our careers. There's a seasonality to work. And often when we're asking ourselves decisions about what we want, we're doing it from the perspective of, I need to choose because this is the job that I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And so the stakes feel so high. And we discount a few things. One is our own ability to course correct. So if you do make a mistake, you take the leap and realize it's not for you. It's a two-way door decision. You often can walk through that door and walk back, and maybe you don't get the exact same job that you had, but you have a lot more of a safety net underneath you than you might assume. And then the second thing is that we assume that whatever choice we make has to define us for the rest of our lives. And, I am like you, and where I feel like my core, my truer self is an artist, is a writer, is a creative. And yet every quote unquote full-time author I know has other things that they do to help pay the bills. And often they're not sexy or artistic or something that they parade around in their professional bios. And I used to think that it was sort of a necessary evil. Like every time I go speak at a big company or take on a consulting project to help editorial or even teaching this class, it's like, are these things all just distracting me from my true calling? And now I actually believe that a lot of those more sort of money-making gigs that I take on are not just things that enable me to be a writer and spend time writing books. They're things that fuel my creative practice because they put me in contact with different types of people in the world. They get me out of my bubble. They get me out of my head and doing things. And so there's something that I think is valuable about this tension that you're struggling with of like, do I become Serenity the artist, or do I have to be Serenity the corporate shill? And in actuality, the fact that you're asking those two questions is sort of like balancing on the seesaw. And if you realize that you're, too far on the artist side, there's probably going to be some problems that arise, like financial insecurity or wondering whether you are interacting or being a responsible spouse or mother. If you're too far on the corporate side, there's probably other problems that will arise, like disengagement or feeling like you aren't writing or aren't letting your soul sing. But it's that constant wobble that is what it means to live a life. What I don't like about the phrase work-life balance is that it kind of implies this static equilibrium. Like once you find it, you'll just sort of float in lotus pose 5 feet above the ground and just be there for the rest of your life. In actuality, for everyone, balance is a wobble. It is maybe going a little too far on the artist side, then realizing that like you miss those fancy smoothies that you didn't feel guilty about buying when you had another type of job, and then going too far to the other side and doing that for all your days until you retire.
Darn you, Simone. I'm hearing my sister's voice in my head where she says, she calls it the beautiful tension. Like all these little things in life that are tense and have tension. It's really a beautiful thing, not something to get rid of. One more in this work area. One of my guests, who did happen to be my younger sister, is in this space between jobs. She had kind of the dream job, but there were certain aspects of it that were really outside her working genius, her work archetype. And so she ended up letting that job go while she had some space, financially, et cetera, to just pause for a bit and decide what to do next, which she hasn't done. And there came a point where she was feeling, she didn't expect this and was feeling this question in her mind, does my value only come from money? Which I think a lot of us feel. I would especially, I think the second income in the home maybe is going to be a person who asks that question. I certainly do it as well. Do you have advice for that question?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think especially having kids, it brings that question to the fore of like, not only does my value to myself and my own conception of my self-worth depend on my income, but my value to my dependents and my child. What kind of father am I if I can't provide for him?
Yeah, it's hard. So basically, we got to make money. The household has to make money. But individually, it's not where our value comes from. But it's hard to balance that. Okay. let's talk a little bit about How to Not Know, your second book. Why do I always not know where to put the two? Did you debate that? How to not know or how
Yeah, I
not to
mean,
know?
my like middle school English teacher would say that the title has a split infinitive, which
Yeah.
is incorrect
It doesn't
grammatically,
how to
because you would say how to not
not know.
know splits the infinitive of to know. But I'd argue that how to is the
Yeah,
convention. And so what makes the book a little bit of tongue in cheek in terms of its title, it's a how to book about how to not do something. It's sort of
exactly.
like you get in because you think it's going to give you all the answers for dealing with uncertainty, and that becomes a Trojan horse to learn this meta skill of developing your tolerance for it.
I know. I can't wait to tell sort of the thesis of that book. I first want to know, I think the catalyst for the Good Enough Job was that decision making you had with journalism and IDEO, and realizing how tied your identity was. And probably once the IDEO started and you did kind of crash a bit and think you'd made the wrong decision. So I think that was the catalyst. What was the catalyst for How to Not Know? To
Well,
realize
in
you
many
wanted to
ways, it
write
was
a
that
book.
same moment. I
Same
remember when I
what?
told the story, I said there were sort of two insights.
The
One was
universe
that
gave you
my
two books in
job,
one moment.
yeah, I know, I'm very lucky to have received. You know, one insight was that my job and my identity had become so entwined. And the second insight was that I was looking for certainty where there was no certainty to be found. And so, in many ways, the second book is a letter to that 28-year-old saying, you don't have to know all the answers. You don't have to have 100% certainty before you make a choice. There's other sources of inspiration. In some ways, that is sort of just the superhero origin story that makes the most sense in interviews like
Yeah,
these. I think there was a sense of uncertainty in the job market. And as a labor reporter, I wanted to help people understand not just how to think about uncertainty in their careers, but zoom out and think about uncertainty more broadly. There's some data that I share in the book about how since economists started tracking global uncertainty in the 80s, the 5 highest measurements have all occurred in the last 5 years. So between the pandemics and wars overseas and
millennials are going,
AI,
yeah, we know.
totally,
I'm
it's
not a
like
millennial, but
uncertainty is in the water. And
yeah,
so there's like a way in which I wrote a book to respond to the moment. But it's all of those things, it's not just one source of inspiration that I was like, okay, I had this moment and then it just flooded out of me. It was, all these background
totally.
pieces of data that began to mix in my mind and eventually gave
It's
me
layers.
the drive to put it down on paper.
It's so organized though. You've got these 3 things that we want that make us want certainty: comfort, hubris. Is that how you say it? Hubris and control. And it's just one of the little teeny statistics I love in it is that if we are uncomfortable with uncertainty, we are more likely to accept false information or information we haven't researched. That's so good because we do that so easily. It's like the minute we see a social media thing that feeds where we were kind of leaning anyway, it's like, see,
Yeah,
it's true. That's true. The
totally.
worst thing is true. And we grab it because it feels certain, and we don't like not knowing. That was
Yeah.
so helpful.
I mean, especially during COVID, I feel like this was rampant, both in sort
Yeah.
of origin of the coronavirus, but also all the false certainty around exactly when it's going to be over or exactly how you can avoid it. I think it's nice to feel certain. That's why we have this natural biological reward system built in, because when we are certain, it feels like it's easier to plan for the future. It makes it easier to feel like we can survive. The problem is that we find certainty, or we at least look for certainty, where there is no certainty on offer. And there are lots of false positives, whether it's a guru for a cult telling you exactly how you want to live your life, or some pundit on the TV telling you exactly when the stock market is going to crash, or some social media influencer telling you the only way that you can sleep train your baby, or the only way that you can live till 100 is if you eat this one food. It's like these little teases of certainty are very attractive for the reasons I just laid out. But in actuality, anything, especially anything that hasn't happened yet, by default is uncertain. And so the more comfortable we can get with uncertainty, the more gracefully we'll be able to adapt to whatever does come our way.
The more comfortable we can get with uncertainty. I love that. You specifically say, just as you said to me a moment ago about the tension, it's not a problem. Uncertainty is not a problem to solve. That's kind of the point to the book. And one of the most poetic moments is you were going through a very difficult time, you and your wife, extremely uncertain. And what you said is, keeping in touch with how I was feeling was the closest thing to certainty I could find.
Mm.
I think that's so good. It's like, just go ahead and accept the uncertainty,
Mm-hmm.
but at least you can keep in touch with how it feels.
Yeah,
Basically.
totally. It's
Yeah.
another way of saying, like, the only thing that is certain is the present moment and
Yeah.
what is true right now for you. Whether that's what's going on in your body or how you're feeling or what you have control to influence today. These are the things that we should be concerning ourselves with first and foremost, because they are in our control. As Eckhart Tolle says, life is just a series of nows. It's like
Yeah.
this moment, this moment, this moment, this moment, this moment. And I think one of the natural tendencies we have when we face uncertainty is to catastrophize, is to think about all the things that can go wrong. And in actuality, uncertainty in and of itself is value neutral. It's a state of knowledge. And I think part of my goal for the book was helping people understand that, yes, uncertainty can be uncomfortable. It can cause anxiety and fear and worry, but it can also be the birthplace of possibility. It can also be the beginning of growth and learning and change and development. And so rather than looking at uncertainty as a problem to be solved, as you said, we can try to stay with uncertainty, to be able to tolerate it for long enough so that we can see the potentially wondrous things that are waiting on the other side of our discomfort.
Stay with uncertainty. That is exactly okay. You tell a story in the book about a couple trying to decide whether to part ways forever.
Mm-hmm.
And they do it for a year to decide. And then they're going to come back together and decide. And one thing you say about uncertainty, that it can help if there's a time limit on it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's sometimes completely out of our control. It's often out of our control. But do you have advice for when to know if the uncertainty is unsolvable, or
Mm.
if it might have a time limit, or if we could put a time limit on it?
Yeah, well, it's such a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
But one rule of thumb that I like is, when, say for me, I love to sort of externalize my problems, as you might be able to pick up on, and talk to other people about them. When it feels like you're no longer learning anything from conversations, maybe it's a good sign that you have to decide. And the other thing that I think is helpful to keep in mind is this quote from this psychologist named Rollo May that I cite in the book. And he says that commitment is healthiest not in the absence of doubt, but in spite of doubt. And I love this idea, because to me what it means is we have to choose even when we're unsure. We can't wait till we're 100% sure to choose, because it is through committing before we're completely sure or we're completely ready that gives us the opportunity to refine our character, to make the decision right, to be able to make choices that are in line with our values, so that even if we don't get the outcome that we desire, we can stay with our decisions because they represent what our aspirational self would have wanted. And so, there's so much uncertainty right now in particular. I think about young people and jobs in particular. And the cost of looking for certainty is manifold, but maybe most importantly, the cost is time. If you wait till you're certain about what your passion is, or what your calling is, or what your vocation is, or the perfect ikigai job for your personality type, then you will waste a lot of time without actually learning, which can only be done through the doing. It's through the action that the fog begins to dissipate.
Ikigai. Is that, yeah, that's a good word. um, okay. Where do I go now? There's so much I want to talk to you about, but I want to talk about the important parts. Let's go to, okay, here's one. How do you feel about job hopping?
Hmm.
You know, like if we're just looking for the good enough job, if I in my head it's almost the only thing I believe in anymore when it comes to
Hmm.
work, except I don't do it that much because it's very hard to do. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think in and of itself, it is neither a problem or a panacea. I think there's value in job hopping in that being willing to try different things can teach you more about yourself and what you like. As I mentioned, I believe in a seasonality of work, and what you might have needed from work
That's
3 years
right.
ago might not be what you need from work today. But I also think there is a risk in doing too much hopping around without staying with a given choice for long enough to let it develop. Um, I'll give a quick analogy. So in my early 20s, I was single and I remember doing a lot of dating, dating different types of people. And I think my assumption was I can't know what I like until I've
Mm-hmm.
tried all these different types of relationships. And so I was just sort of this novelty junkie, and I was going on lots of first dates. And I had this realization that actually what would be novel for me at that point in my life is to be in a relationship for longer than 3 months or however long my longest relationship was at that point. And
So
it's
good.
through the development of going through the honeymoon phase and getting past our first fight and really growing with someone that would show me more than just
Mm.
going from one shiny object to the next. And I think the same can be true with our careers, where, yes, I'm a believer in job hopping. I think the traditional career ladder is breaking down before our eyes. I think careers will look more and more like jumping from one lily pad to another, and lateral moves and moves where you take a pay cut or moves in a completely different industry. And I'm wary of people who just jump because it's a balm for a restless leg. And the minute something gets hard, they want to like start over again. And so I believe in hopping, but I think there's also value in sticking with something for longer than just feels comfortable.
That's a very helpful, balanced answer. I really appreciate that
Mm.
answer because I I feel like there's this moral high ground that I've been given, not just in my upbringing or whatever, in staying like
Mm-hmm.
forever in a thing. Like
Yeah.
loyalty is God, and I so don't love that, but I
Mm-hmm.
do absolutely agree with staying long enough to go through to give it your best kind of thing and to see what you can learn. So that's really great, a really great balanced answer. So we kind of know what led to the good enough job and what led to how to not know. And this super fan is sort of wondering what's in my future from Simone Stolzoff.
Mm.
So I'm wondering what you're thinking about these days. What obsesses your mind? What are you talking to
Yeah.
your Uber driver about?
It's a good question. It's a question that I'm asking myself too. Um, I started working on How to Not Know before the good enough job was even on the shelves. And so I very quickly transitioned from book one to book two. And, How to Not Know has only been out for 2 months or so. I'm impressed that you've read it twice. It's only been out for a little while. Um, and I don't have an idea for a third book. I have some things that I'm curious about, some concepts that I'm exploring, but I also I'm trying to honor this liminal space that I'm in right now.
Yeah.
And I'm just coming off a tour and doing a lot of talking about the book. And then I took a vacation, I got home, and it feels like I had my life figured out until Sunday, and now it's Monday, if you've ever had that feeling for yourself. And I feel this tendency inside of me to want certainty, to want to have the next job or the next book lined up. So it's easy to answer the what do you do question, or at least, answer some of my own questioning. And yet I do think that this period, this transition, when you're not quite there or here, is such rich soil. And it gives you the opportunity to explore different possibilities. It gives you the opportunity to try things on for size, run experiments, prototype, shift up your routine, have days that don't look similar from one day to the next. And as much as I crave the certainty of having an easy answer to what book do you want to ride next, I'm trying to practice what I preach a little bit and be comfortable enough in the not knowing so that I can wait to see what emerges.
You're being made to prove your own point.
Yeah, I'm trying.
The universe always does that to us. I would just have a blog post about something. And the very next day, that thing in my life would fall completely apart. Like I had to really tone in and live what I had written. It's the same thing with work.
Be careful what you write your blog posts about,
Totally. And so this work topic has been a topic for me for so long, and I write about it. Like I have this book started, just sort of a memoir style of what work has been like for me with that artist angst and all that. And I write it knowing what I really hoped is that I would get out. That I would get out. I would just escape it and transcend the day job life and be a full-time artist. But then I realized that doesn't, what I'm writing about is how you carry the tension, like you said. And so to just escape would, then I wouldn't be practicing. Yeah.
Well, you'd escape, but you'd probably find another trap. There's this great op-ed that, I think it was one of the most popular op-eds in the New York Times history, written by this philosopher named Alain de Botton, and it had a great clickbaity title. The title was "Why You'll Marry the Wrong Person." And his argument was essentially that when we think about who we might marry, we just romanticize their best qualities. We think about, how funny they are and smart they are and beautiful they are. But maybe a better question is, in what ways are they crazy? And more specifically, in what ways are you crazy? And his point is, with any person, there's bound to be tension. There's bound to be things that you love about them and things that you don't like as much about them, similar to a job. And rather than just ask about what attractive things you desire, it is also helpful to ask what type of suck you're willing to put up with. And I think the same can be said for our careers where, yes, it's really easy to think about the greener grass or all of the benefits that will come from your life if you become a full-time artist. And it's less easy to make concrete the downsides of that path. Maybe the things that you love about your current job that you're giving up, or the unexpected stressors that come from not having coworkers, or not having someone to tell you how to spend your time, or not having money as being an easy measure of your self-worth. And so I just caution the sort of romanticization of the solopreneur, the freelancer, the artist life as well. Because yes, there's lots of elements that are great about it. I love not going to meetings that should have been emails. I like not having to deal with office politics. But it's also important to be clear-eyed about, the new tensions, the new sucks that will emerge, and ask yourself, what problems am I most willing to bear?
Oh, what problems? I have a candle, by the way. It smells like this meeting should have been an email. Yeah.
Nice.
It's good. That's a really good point. Think of the problems you're willing to bear. let's go to my favorite part. Actually, we've had all my favorite parts. Oh, and I read the book twice because I gulp a book the first time. Like,
Mm.
oh, I went every word so quick. And so then it's like, I kind of have to slow down the next time.
Mm.
Because after I got done, I couldn't remember your three things. What are the three things that And so I wanted to go back and take it all in again. Plus, I knew that I was going to get to talk to you because you so awesomely agreed. So I wanted to make sure I knew your stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
So I like to end the show with "It worked for me," and it's something in your life, an aha moment, or you regularly make sure it's in your life because it helps you find meaning in life or what matters. Do you have something for the audience about that?
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind was this idea of outsourcing your willpower. So I'll tell you a quick story. So back in 2020, the beginning of the pandemic, I had a desire to maybe write a book one day. And I told a friend of mine, this guy named Smiley, and he said, "Oh, I have another friend that also wants to write a book. Why don't I introduce you?" And her name is Raina Cohen. And we started meeting weekly on Wednesdays, and we became each other's accountability buddies. And we wouldn't edit each other's work. We would just go on a Zoom call and say, "Hey, like, how was the past week for you and your goal of writing this book? What do you want to accomplish between this week and next week?" And for 3 years, without having ever met in person, we continued these weekly meetings. And within months of each other, we got book deals, and then our books published, and they were both bestsellers. And that's sort of like the nice bow on the end of the story.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that I took away was just the power of having someone else holding your dream alongside you. And rather than having to really just put my head down and use discipline and willpower to get it done, having Raina's weekly check-in when I knew that come Wednesday, she's going to ask me what I've done between last Wednesday and this Wednesday has been really helpful for my own creative process. And so the "it worked for me" is finding a creative community, both as a source of inspiration and a source of accountability. And I think it's the most underrated part of the creative process is how can you find the others? How can you find people who have dreams that are adjacent to yours, and so they can help you remember what yours are?
It's it's come up on this podcast before that it's a weakness of mine. I feel like I've lacked a tribe. And one reason I've kind of blamed my own fear because the critique group aspect was not my fave. But you're saying you and Raina did not do that. It wasn't about critiquing. It was just the outsourcing your willpower. And that's cool. I love that.
And having someone else to help manage the sort of emotional ups and downs of the creative path as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we got to pretty much everything I wanted to. I just thank you so much for what you're putting out there. It's really helping me. It's really good for my soul. It's good for my angst. And it gives me lots of great talking points. And it was such a favor for you to come on the show. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to talk with someone who's really engaged with the work. You know, I've done lots of fancy podcast interviews with people that you've probably heard of before. And this was
Dean Harris.
One of my favorite conversations just because, you know, you actually got to relate to it person to person. So thanks for having me on. If you want to learn more about the books, you can go to howtonotknow.com and everything you need is there.
Howtonotknow.com. I will definitely link to it in the show notes. Thank you, Simone.
Thank you. Take it easy.